Welcome to Charts Today. My name is David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 26th of September, comes to you from London. And we're seeing the dollar index just holding on to its bullishness. We had a good day yesterday. No big surprises here. We're in the bull trend. We've talked about these upside targets. It's all about dollar strength, and we see here on the long-term chart, the weekly, it's heading higher all the time, nudging new highs. And we're talking really 2-year highs for the dollar, so that's significant. So remembering this is my medium term, my long term, my medium term, and my short term position. So just at a glance, I can get a view of what's going on. Looking at the Eurodollar, we see the euro sinking lower against that dollar, sitting at 109.50. So the 110 level now really compromised. Japanese yen, we're seeing the dollar actually lower, but actually moving into bullish territory against the yen. So dollar strength really being the key there as well for the short-term chart. Sterling sitting at 123.51, and that is actually again just falling against the dollar. So we're seeing a little bit of bearishness against sterling there, and against the euro, sterling is also weaker. Against the Swiss franc, we're seeing sterling up this morning, but again, it's bearish on all three time frames there. Bitcoin sitting at $8,360, not much change since the falls we saw the day before yesterday, but really still looking weak. The US stock market was up last night, the S&P 500 up nearly 2/3%, not enough to take the short-term chart bullish. So we are still seeing that rollover. The same with the Nasdaq, and the Dow was up by a similar amount, but again, not enough to turn the chart bullish. And the Russell 2000 index also in bearish territory on the short term. So for the moment, US indices are looking weak, or looking ripe for a little bit of a sell-off, although the long-term trends are still bullish, of course. The futures, we're seeing the S&P future up slightly and the Nasdaq E-mini down slightly, but virtually no change there. So our call for today for the US market is a flat opening. Looking at FTSE this morning, it's up 1/3%, but again, not enough to take the short-term chart bullish. And the same with the 250. We are still seeing the impact of this rollover occurring in European markets. And the same, of course, is true for the DAX. We're up 1/4% this morning, but we're in bearish territory on the short-term chart. And the same with the CAC Quarante, up 1/4% this morning, but still in bearish territory. The Japanese market was up slightly overnight. It's holding on to its long-term trend, and the Hang Seng was actually up, but not enough to turn this chart bullish. It's bearish on all three time frames at the moment. In Shanghai, we're actually down nearly 1%. That's enough to take this market now bearish, hitting medium-term resistance here on the chart. That's what we're seeing with this lagging line hitting the cloud, and the long-term chart is still bearish. So Chinese stocks still looking bearish on all three time frames. And looking at the Sensex this morning in India, we're up 0.7%. That's one market that is bucking the trend. The tax cuts that we saw last week, holding on to those gains as a result of that policy. The Aussie market down 0.5%, but not enough to drag this market into bearish territory on the short-term chart. Still above the cloud on the lagging line, so we're bullish on all three time frames. And looking at Brent crude, we're seeing just sitting at that 62 level. So post the Saudi attacks, Brent crude is still bearish on all three time frames, as is WTI. We're in bearish territory there as well. So crude oil prices still under long-term bearish pressure. US NatGas sitting at 252, short-term bearish, medium-term bullish. And if we look at gold, we fell back quite significantly yesterday. Strong dollar, of course, means weaker commodities generally. We saw that rise in the dollar, fall in gold. We are back into short-term bearish territory, but of course the medium and long-term chart's still looking very bullish for gold. We've got upside potential targets here of 12 and 13%, so still looking bullish for the gold chart on the long term. Silver also falling away into bearish territory on the short term. No big surprises there. Tends to follow gold, of course. And looking at the US 10-year yields, we are sitting at 1.71%. So we did rise quite sharply on that falling dollar yesterday, but we are not yet bullish, so we're still bearish on all three timeframes on the yield. That means, of course, that German bonds have had a recovery and found some bullish territory, found some support, and we are still bullish on the medium, short, and long-term charts. So taking a look now at the individual stocks, this data coming from Yahoo Finance, we start by looking at the Dow Jones. The top performer yesterday was Nike, up a massive 4%. That's a big jump for Nike, and they're looking steady to jump to new all-time highs there, and we're seeing that looking pretty strong as a breakout. Looking at the downside, we had United Health Group, they were down 1.6%, Merck were down, Procter & Gamble were down, Johnson & Johnson were down, Pfizer were down, so we're seeing US pharmaceuticals were hit yesterday. Taking a look at the Nasdaq 100, the best performer was Cintas Corporation, they were up nearly 6%, Netflix recovering there, up 4%, Nvidia up 3%. That Netflix chart, by the way, not actually looking good at all, and we're seeing the real sell-off there, having outperformed the market most of this year by 20%. Suddenly we're falling away on Netflix. Nvidia, they were up 3.3%. They were the darling of the stock market a couple of years ago, but they've really struggled ever since, and we're seeing the shares still under pressure on that long-term chart. On the downside, we had Insight Corporation, they were down 2.4%, and we see here the chart there looking bearish as well. Looking at the Aussie market, the best performer last night was Bingo Industries. They were up 6%, so that was quite key. On the downside, we had Northern Star Resources down 4%, but amazing looking chart and outperforming the Dow by some 30% this year, so looking very strong there. Looking at the Indian market now, the best performer is Hindustan Petroleum. They're up 5.5%, so they're looking stronger, and we're just waiting for the chart to come in there, and we can see here they're just starting to turn a corner there. On the downside, the worst performer was Yes Bank, and they've been in the doldrums many times. Are they the worst performer, just continuing to fall, underperforming the Dow Jones by 75% this year. So it just shows how different that can be, and we see the live prices coming in from Yahoo Finance there. Taking a look into Europe now, the UK market, Halma is the best performer, up 2.3%. We're seeing quite a lot of defences improving there, but on the downside, and Halma just flat on that chart. On the downside, it's Pearson's. They're down 6%, so they've been hit this morning. Chart actually just falling away completely. That's taking them into long-term bearish territory. So that is a significant move for Pearson's. Expect further falls from there. IAG reporting this morning that the strike has cost them 132 million euros, the pilot strike, and so consequently we're seeing a fall away there, down 4%, and still looking pretty bearish against the Dow Jones index there. Taking a look at the 250 now, the best performer, Vivo Energy, they're up 2.7%. Ted Baker, the next best performer, they've been in the news quite a lot lately, but still looking very bearish on the chart. Metro Bank also has been a stock to really watch for plummet, and they're up this morning by 2%, but it's hardly any consolation for shareholders in that stock. Woodford Payton Capital Trust, they're down a further 7% this morning, so there we're seeing quite a lot of bearishness, and SSP down 6%, so that's also bearish. Taking a look at the Euro stocks, the top 50 in Europe, Amadeus IT Group, they're up, but the chart's still looking a little bit bearish as we cross into that territory. And on the downside in Europe, Adidas, we're seeing lower this morning, so but that chart's still looking great. ING, we're seeing banks having a sell-off here. ING, SocGen, Banco Santander, BNP Paribas, Banco Bilbao, so all the banks actually looking pretty bearish this morning in Europe. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.